Was at a summer league game and we were playing the San Antonio Spurs, and a guy walked up to me and he goes, "Dave Sholler?" And listen, in the UFC world, our fans are so great in the UFC. Like, it was cool to be recognized, but in the NBA, it doesn't happen. And no one confuses me with John Anik either, which is, John, I love you, a positive. But the guy came up to me. He's like, "Dave Sholler?" He's like, "What's it like being in the NBA now that you're at the UFC?" And we had this great conversation. And finally, he turns at me. He goes, "You know what I have to ask you, right?" And I'm like, "Hit me." He goes, "What was it like being in between Jones and Cormier?" The number one question I get from athletes, fans, grandmothers, everyone wants to know what that was like. So that was pretty cool. I didn't have a feeling that it was going to become as volatile as it became. It didn't feel to me like any other press conference, other than that I was super excited for the fight itself. I just knew that it was going to be electric. I knew that there was bad blood. But quite frankly, like when you talk about Chuck and Tito and Randy and some of those big fights, there's been bad blood in the UFC before. I mean, the UFC sells best when there's bad blood. So the atmosphere in the lobby was just energetic. There was something about the energy. And don't forget, Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier were there too. So for me, it just felt like we were on the cusp of something special. Which is funny because if you fast forward, we had to delay that fight. And Dana and I talked about this back in like October and November before I left. Had that fight taken place when it was supposed to take place in September, I'm not sure we're not sitting here talking about that being the biggest fight of all time, because it was headlines everywhere. And while you never want that type of incident to happen, it was just so volatile, so raw, so real. But the experience, to answer your question, in the MGM lobby that day, it didn't feel anything different than what I was used to, but there was something electric about the atmosphere. You had this young, up-and-coming star in Conor McGregor who just had it. You had Jon Jones, who had so much, I guess you would call it just this air of invincibility about him, and he is polarizing. And you had Daniel Cormier, this all-American guy, who for some reason was just rubbed the wrong way by Jon Jones. There was a side of Daniel Cormier that you saw that day. I said, that's not the same guy. This is wiring him differently. But if you had to ask me, if you put me on the spot and said, who's throwing you off the stage today? I said Conor and Dustin, not those two. And it was only because with Jon and with Daniel, they've both been at that level of the dance before. They know how to sell the fight, but I didn't expect it to get physical like that. A lot of people ask me, like, do you have any regrets when your time in the UFC? You're damn right I do. And the biggest regret is not negotiating a royalty deal on that footage. I have literally seen myself thrown off the stage so many times. Like, if I got called a nickel, you might call me Dave Fertitta. So I remember two things. One, Jon beelining across the stage in a way that, I had before that time done stare downs with Vanderlei Silva. All right? Like, I think I was equipped to know when guys are firing on a different cylinder. Although I didn't have as much experience as Dana being in the center of those things as much as he had. But the way Jon came across the stage, I'll never forget going, this doesn't feel right. And then Daniel does the two-handed throat slam. And I said, this is a little bit more than I bargained for today. And it all happened so quickly. I equate it, and I hope this doesn't sound too far-fetched, but it reminded me of a car accident that I had been in, where it happened so quickly. I don't necessarily remember the actions in the middle. The one thing I do remember is grabbing Jon Jones by the bicep, and for some reason thinking I was going to stop him. Like, I know a lot of people make fun of the moment, but for some reason, like, I thought I was going to stop the 6'4" brother of two NFL stars who happens to be the baddest man on the planet. But when I felt the strength of Jon Jones, I said, yeah, this isn't going to end too well for me. I made friends with the backdrop. And then Jon threw that left hand. And it was the equivalent of standing in the middle of a hurricane. The way the wind from that, I'll never forget that. That's what I remember, was that left hand as I'm kind of falling backwards, just being winged at Daniel Cormier, as Daniel's falling backwards. And then the backdrop goes down, and it was chaos from there. When it happened, it was so quick, but when John gets up and does the lion roar, which I call it, when he gets up on that side stage and does the lion roar, my instincts were we've got to get these guys out of this area. And at that time, there was a couple guards on Daniel kind of dragging him out. There was a shoe that went flying by. But John, a lot of people know John Jones from what they read or what they see. I know John Jones on a different level. I remember John coming into the UFC. I have had many car rides with John Jones. I have been to John Jones' house during some trying times in his professional career. I know John fairly well, and there's a level of respect that I have for John based on our relationship. The guy that was doing the lion roar was downright scary, because that was the guy that gets into the octagon when the door closes. That was the guy that was on another level. And on the flip side, just locking eyes with Daniel Cormier, the Olympian, the All-American dad, the Fox analyst, that wasn't that guy. That was a guy who felt like he had been wronged and disrespected. And I think that's the moment, if I could think about an epiphany, where I was like, we're really fortunate here that someone didn't get seriously injured. Forget me, or really anybody that was involved with trying to break it up. I'm talking about people checking into the hotel. That day, if you remember, John, there were some older security guards working the event for the mere purpose of crowd control. So I think when it started to calm down after he did the lion roar, I said, we've got to get this thing under control. But I was looking around and just kind of assessing the carnage. I wrestle with that moment from a professional standpoint, in the sense that the fight game is not rainbows and butterflies. It's not. The biggest fights in UFC history, the biggest fights in boxing history, are rooted in bad blood. Now listen, we're incredibly fortunate that no one was truly injured in that altercation. But I think it also demonstrated the level of animosity in a way that no promo could. I had a chance to see the new promo that Craig Borsari and Dana had cut, that aired over the weekend at 2:13, and to me, it brought me back to the moment, because it captured the story so well, but it also captured the animosity. This is not fake. This is not something that's been manufactured. These guys want to beat the hell out of each other. So when you talk about Anaheim, California at the end of July, if that's not circled on your date, with all due respect to Conor and Floyd and the hype that fight's going to create, there's a dance a month before that's maybe just as important, if not more important, to the overall history of mixed martial arts. John Jones has had his fair share of adversity, a lot of it self-inflicted. I know John on a level where I think deep down there's a better human being that he's put forward in the public eye. I've seen him interact with his kids. I've seen him interact with his late mother. I've seen how he interacts with his brothers. I think, and this is not in defense of John Jones, because it's not my place, but John had achieved such a level of incredible success at the age of 23. The money, the fame, the notoriety, the distractions, walking into a club and having people throw whatever you want at that particular star. I think it shows you the real responsibility that comes with fame and money and celebrity. And I think he'd tell you firsthand that he didn't balance it well early in his career. I think what has happened to John, whether it was the legal incidents or the lawsuit or just being out of action, I think it's humanized him in a sense that he realizes that none of this is a given. None of this is something you can take for granted. And a John Jones with a professional chip on his shoulder is a scary John Jones.